Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Illustrator for Fashion seminar. It's really great to see everybody. My name is Justine Sanborn, and I am the instructor for Illustrator for Fashion at Noble Desktop. So I'm really happy and glad to be here with you all tonight as we talk about some really fun stuff about Illustrator. Illustrator is a really powerful vector-based program that's capable of doing a lot of different unique tasks. And one of those really unique and fun tasks is creating fashion flats and fashion artwork. With the project that we're going to be working on today, we're going to be focusing on something that you could ultimately send to an online resource, perhaps something like Spoonflower. There's actually quite a few of them out there. And you could ultimately get your patterns either printed on fabric that you can create something from that. And or there are other companies like Printify that are able to actually print directly on garments. So full prints, which is fantastic. So we're going to go ahead and get ourselves started here. The first thing that I just wanted to do really quickly is to go through the pieces that I plan on showing you today. So ultimately, what you're going to be learning from today's stream is number one, how shapes, brushes, and paint tools work. So we're going to be working with customizing some shapes. We're actually going to be using some specifically the warping tool, but there are other tools that are able to manipulate shapes quite quickly, which is really nice and efficient, especially when you're trying to create different types of textures or looks for your pattern. Brushes, we can talk about simple brushes. Primarily what we're going to be talking about is just doing a simple stitch, which will incorporate a dashed line. And paint tools, which is specifically your live paint bucket tool, which is an incredibly powerful tool. I personally use it all the time, and it's extremely helpful for this process of creating fashion flats. Sorry in advance if you hear any walking around of a little furry friend. My dog is right next to me, so you have to excuse me for that. The second thing that you'll be taking away, there you go, he's shaking. The second thing that you'll be taking from this are tips in terms of creating patterns and working with graphics to use in those patterns. So we will be creating a pattern swatch in Illustrator, and I'll be showing you a variety of different steps involved in that process. There are a couple different methods that you can use or take advantage of through that, but we're going to be ultimately focused on creating illustrations that are vector based and then using that for patterns. But again, there are more than just that one way. Okay. And lastly, you can save your files either for web or production, and talking about those saving formats that are advantageous for, again, both of those instances. A lot of times when you create a design, you also want to share it on maybe a social media platform or your website, how you could save that quite efficiently. And then also how you could send the file itself to your actual manufacturer, or if, again, you're using one of those online resources, how you could do that. Ultimately, what we're going to end up with today is a document that looks pretty similar to this. Probably going to make a few adjustments as we go on, but just a couple of things to note is the custom pattern that we're going to create here. You'll notice that in this actual rectangle, and also in the sweater itself, that the pattern does have a color of orange in the background. So we'll be adding a color in the background of the pattern as well. And we'll also be adding some ridges to the sweater sleeves and on the bottom of the sweater as well. We'll be doing that by creating a custom brush. So yeah, we've got a lot on our plate today. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this and pop into Illustrator. Okay. So a couple of things before we get ourselves started. Everyone you might have a different preference in terms of what you prefer your setup to be in Illustrator. Just to give you a heads up that if your Illustrator does not look like mine, that is absolutely okay. Just a quick heads up that basically everything in the work environment here is just comprised of a bunch of different panels, all of which serve a different purpose. A lot of what we're going to be doing today is going to be working with some panels that perhaps you haven't used before in Illustrator. So it'll be a fun experience with that. Okay. Also, just to get myself started, I do want to see my layers, which are kind of hidden right now. So I'm just going to expand those by clicking on this double arrow on the top right of those panels, just so I can see what's happening. I have one simple layer, nothing too crazy town there. I just like to see what I'm doing. I could also open this. It isn't super chaotic yet, but I'm sure it will be once I get things started here. Okay. In case you wanted to follow along, I do want to mention that in the description of the YouTube video are the actual files that you can use to follow along. So if you are somebody that prefers to go and follow along with tutorials, this is a great opportunity to do that. So if you take a look right under the description or right below the video, you will see a link to download the actual files that you can work with as I go through them with you. Okay. Otherwise, you can download them later, whatever you want, or just watch, take notes, whatever works best for you. Okay. So the first thing that I want to do is there's a couple of different steps involved in this process. So I did kind of mention the steps sort of, but I just want to kind of reiterate that before we get started. You will see that right now the sweater is completely blank. I have a completely blank rectangle here, which will eventually house the pattern as well. And then I have two shapes, but you might have noticed that in the example that I showed you earlier, that there was an additional flower, additional leaf, and then some different circular shapes. So we are going to be working with those. I'm not going to be showing you how to create these from scratch because it's a bit more of a fluid process, and also frankly depends on what type of artist you are in Illustrator in terms of how you would like to create those. So we're going to be spending more time with creating the different circular shapes, even though they were not complete. They're like abstract circles. So I'll be adding that and creating a duplicate of that. Okay. With that being said, that is going to be where we need to get ourselves started. Okay. In order to create a pattern, it is essential to create the graphic of which you want the pattern to be. So right now it's incomplete. Okay. When you're working on a pattern, or rather something that you intend on using as a pattern in Illustrator, my suggestion is to visualize either one of two things. Either visualize your content in the shape of a rectangle, or visualize your content in the shape of a hexagon. Okay, six sides. Yeah. Okay. Your patterns are able to work within one of those two shapes ultimately. So that's why when I'm working with this content, I'm constantly visualizing a rectangle. If you want, you might want to create a rectangle in the background. That also works as well. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and get ourselves started. Okay. The first thing that I do want to do is I want to create a duplicate of these two shapes and manipulate them into an area that will look nice repeated. Okay, so in order to do so, I am going to switch over to my selection tool. That's your cursor that's right at the top of the application. And we're going to go ahead and select one of these shapes to get ourselves started. I prefer to do one at a time. That way I'm not concerned about reflecting them or what have you. That might be a little bit more challenging if I copied both. So I'm just going to grab this flower. I'm just going to click once. And I prefer to use a shortcut. This shortcut allows me to not only duplicate the object, but also choose where I want to put it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Alt or Option on my keyboard. You're going to notice that my cursor changes to a double arrow. So the black arrow is on top of this white arrow. That is the indication that you're about to create a duplicate shape. So I'm going to go ahead and click and drag down, and then release my mouse click first, then release my modifying key of Alt or Option. Now, this, if duplicated, is going to look a little weird and very angular, which is not really the vibe that I'm going for. So what I want to do with this, it's a rose, I think. Tulip, maybe? I'm not a flower person, so bear with me. But we're going to rotate it so that way it's facing downwards instead of upwards, okay? In order to rotate your shape, you're just going to move your cursor a little bit further away from one of the corners, and you're going to notice that your cursor changes to an opposing arrow that's sort of curved. Once you see that icon, then what you can do is you can click and drag in whatever direction you want to rotate. So I'm going to click and drag whatever the way that was, the right way. We're rotating the right way, but literally we rotated right. Okay. Once I'm happy with the rotation location, I'm just going to go ahead again, release my mouse click, and then I'm going to click and drag and just move that into place. I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm going to leave that as is. I'm going to go to the next step and ultimately repeat that process with the leaf. I'm again going to hold down Alt or Option, hover over the object, wait to see those double arrows, cool, click and drag down, release my mouse click first, then release the modifying keys. Again, I'm going to hover over slightly away from one of the corners, click and drag, rotate that. I want to rotate a little bit more. It's a bit too straight for my liking. Let me see. A little bit more. There we go. Why is it being sassy? Interesting. That's a unique... I must have pressed something wrong. It looks like it's not rotating, but instead actually resizing the shape. Which, okay. There's no buttons being pressed down to make that happen. And hey, this is a great opportunity for me to talk about something that happens in Illustrator all the time. Let's talk about it. Things can happen that are not things that you want to happen, that are not intentional. And you're like, hey, what is that? Why did that happen? That's fine. Okay. You probably did something. So I probably did something, and that's okay. If you want, you can figure out perhaps what you did wrong by maybe taking a couple steps back and then trying it again. My assumption, again, with the instance with me is that I think maybe I had a button pressed down while I was rotating it or something. Very rarely, I would say 5% of the time, when something like that happens where it's not what was supposed to happen, about 5% of the time it is an application error, but 5% is very few and far between. So again, if anything like that happens that's weird or not what you expect to happen, my suggestion is to take a couple steps back, try it again, see if it happens again, and see if you did anything different the second time. Okay, that usually can solve the problem that you might be experiencing in any of these programs, honestly. So just a quick little suggestion in terms of dealing with those instances. For what we're dealing with here, we're going to let it be. I'm not mad about it. I'm okay with it. And again, I don't really want to necessarily talk about sorting out those mistakes other than what I just said. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. I'm happy with where those are located and how they're shaped. Okay. Now, the second thing that you saw in the example is that there were a variety of these different abstract circular shapes. They weren't perfect circles. They were sort of wavy and flowy. And I want to show you all how to create those fairly quickly. Basically, it's going to be a two-step process, of creating a few different circles with the ellipse tool and then changing the shapes with the warp tool. Okay. So step one, we're going to go ahead and switch to the ellipse tool. Most of your tools in your tools panel do have shortcuts. So you could hit the letter L for ellipse, and that will switch over to the ellipse tool. Okay. Now, before I create the ellipse, I do want to check what color I am using. I'm going to navigate up to my control panel to do that. In the top left-hand side of my control panel, you will see I have both my fill and the stroke color, which is the outline. I am just focused on the fill. Okay. Right now, my fill is set to white, which is not what I want for the shape. I'm actually going to go with quite a light gray. So this light gray here, I think that's maybe like 10 or 20%. Okay, 10. Yeah, really light gray for the ellipses that I'm going to create. Okay, I can go ahead and either click away or click on the arrow to close that. And I'm just going to go ahead and create some ellipses. They don't have to be perfect circles if some of them just so happen to be perfect circles, because frankly, it's pretty easy to make perfect circles now because of the smart guides. But anyway, I'm just going to click and drag and create a few in a variety of different negative space areas. Maybe I have this one that's a bit more oblong and this one here. Create a few more. And as I'm creating these, what I'm doing is I'm just simply clicking and dragging, nothing too crazy with that process there. So we're just creating some shapes. like so. Maybe one more up here. Okay, great. I'm happy with that. All right. Now, this could be fine, but I want to take it to the next step. I want it to be a bit more, I don't want to say unique, but a bit more interesting to look at. The issue with just having a bunch of circles and ovals is that it doesn't work or meld as well with the floral shapes that we have already going on in the pattern. So they feel like they are misplaced or that they don't necessarily belong here. So in order to make them look like they belong a little bit more, again, I want to manipulate the shapes, but I don't want to spend a ton of time doing it. Okay. This is where your different warp tools really come into play. I use these all the time. I use them especially for warping text. But I also use it to create a variety of different textures. Maybe if I'm like creating grass or something that is otherwise going to be a bit more challenging or time consuming to create, I will use these tools. Okay. So these tools are located about in the middle of your tools panel. If you have just a single row for your tools panel, what you're going to see first is your width tool, which is actually one of the tools that I don't usually use that much. Not saying that it's not useful. It's just, for me, not something that I use all the time. However, if you right click on this, you will see a variety of different tools that are, again, able to manipulate and essentially warp your content. You literally have the warp tool, which is actually what I'm going to be using here in a little bit. You have the twirl tool, pucker tool, bloat, scallop, crystallize, and wrinkle. All fantastic tools that can be used to, again, manipulate, sometimes in this instance, really simple shapes into something that's unique, which is why I love them. And again, it's very efficient. Okay. Now here's the trick. In order to use any of these tools, you have to have something selected. Okay. Right now, I don't have anything selected. So I need to circle back to my selection tool, select the circles, and then choose what warping tool I want. Okay. Luckily, I already have my selection tool still selected. Good for me. I'm going to go ahead and just start selecting all of these shapes. I'm going to hold down Shift while I'm clicking on each of them with my mouse. The reason why I'm not clicking and dragging to make my selection is because then it would select the leaves and the flowers, and I don't want that. All right, so now that I have them all selected, I can navigate back to my different warp options that I have. I am going to select the warp tool itself, and you're going to see that right now my brush is quite large. Okay, I was working on a project that basically the shapes were a bit bigger, so I readjusted the size of the warp tool to be a bit bigger itself. So if this is a bit too big for what you want to work with or what you want to manipulate, what you can do, and you can do this with a lot of the tools in Illustrator as well, you can actually double click on the tool in the tools panel and it will pull up options for that tool that you double clicked on. Super handy. And I'm going to go ahead and just make this a bit smaller. I'm going to try 1 inch. I think that will work fine for what we're trying to do. And I'm just going to hit OK. Yeah, it's a little bit smaller. It's not too small. The smaller you go with the tool, the more, frankly, jagged the warping results will look. So I do still tend to go with a fairly big brush with the warp tool. Again, it's all on personal preference here. I'm just giving you some suggestions from my experience. Okay. Now, my next step is to ultimately click and drag over my shapes with this tool. So I'm going to start with this shape here. I'm just going to click and drag. And as you can see, it's warping and manipulating the shape into this sort of oblong little circle there. Great. Love to see it. Next, I'm going to go to this one, warp this. Let's see. Yeah, we'll warp it down like that. And then that also goes into the other oval. Warp that. Perfect. I'm going to warp this one here a little bit more. Awesome. And go here. Now, if you didn't want each of these shapes to be warped at the same time, you could have selected them individually. Again, I chose to do a selection of all of them because for me, it's a bit more time-wise, a bit more efficient. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to switch back to my selection tool so you can just take a look-see at what that looks like. And now it looks like almost like paint splatters and not just regular schmegular ellipses, okay, which is nice. And it was really quick. Okay, so again, just to repeat, ultimately what I did is I created a variety of different ellipses with the ellipse tool. I then went and I selected all of my ellipses with my selection tool. And then I navigated to my warp tool in my tools panel to manipulate them. Before I used my warp tool, I did double click on the tool itself to adjust the width and height of the tool so that it was a bit smaller than what I had earlier. Okay. Then in terms of actually using it, it's just a simple click and drag on the items that you have selected. Okay. To reiterate one more time, you do in fact need items selected in order to manipulate them with this tool. Okay. So just some food for thought there. Let me take a sip of my energy drink. Okay. Sorry for the big gulp. Oh, apologize. Next. At this time, probably a great opportunity to save. I'm just going to save this as a different file real quick. So let me save that to, cool. This is always going to come up. Illustrator default. Yeah, we love to see it. Cool. Sounds good. Hit OK. All right. Now we're saved. Second version. Cool. So just a heads up, if you are curious or have any questions about things as I go through them, feel free to type in the chat any of the questions that you might have. I am more than happy to respond to them. Perhaps you are working on some fashion flats yourself and you have questions. You're welcome to ask them as I go through this, okay? Now, the next step that I'm going to be taking is creating the pattern itself, okay? If you've created patterns in Photoshop, this process is a bit different, and it's going to be, once we create it, it's going to actually be located in the swatches panel, okay? And it's going to function very much like a swatch or a saved color, okay? The editing process after you created it is also sort of a odd step or not a very clear step. So that's also what we're going to be talking about, okay? The process of initially creating it, however, I think is pretty straightforward. So what you want to do is you want to, again, with your selection tool, create a selection of all the content that you want in your pattern. So I am going to create a selection box over all the content. Okay. This is also a really great opportunity to visualize and see like, okay, in terms of where everything is at, is that going to work well for my pattern? Because once you create the selection, the bounding box around that selection is going to be a rectangle. So you can visualize what that would look like once you actually have the pattern tile. So that looks good to me. I'm happy with it. So I'm going to go ahead and create the pattern. Okay. So to create the pattern itself, I'm going to navigate up to my menu, choose object in my menu, and navigate down to where it says pattern. Okay. That's like 3/4 of the way down your menu, pattern. So again, object, pattern, and you will see the option to make. So again, object, pattern, make. You will notice that there is no shortcut for this. So it is the way that it is. I believe you can also do this perhaps through the pattern options panel. I've personally never experimented with that. So I always go here. Object, pattern, make. I'm going to make it, and a dialog box is going to pop up telling me, hey, new pattern has been added to your swatches panel. Okay. The next little bit that it says is a bit confusing, but ultimately to clarify, if you make any changes and press the button that says done, those changes will be applied to the swatch that has already been made. Okay. If you want to make changes, but have it saved as a separate swatch, you could save a copy instead, which both of those options are very easy to access once we get into our pattern editing mode. Not quite there yet. Okay. So to get into your pattern editing mode, you have to commit in this dialog box to hitting OK. And here we are. Okay. This is our pattern editing mode. Okay. A couple of things are happening in this mode. Number one, the rest of our artwork, so our sweater and our rectangle, they are gone. All we are focused on is the pattern itself. Okay. What you're seeing right in the middle is the original artwork that you added to the actual pattern. Okay. And around that, there is actually this blue rectangle. Now, this blue rectangle is actually representing what is called your tile. Okay. Your tile is what is quite literally creating the pattern itself. Okay. once you start getting into editing your patterns more, you will know that you are able to actually edit both the tile size as well as the size of the artwork itself, which is quite nice. Okay. You will also see a variety of duplicates around your artwork. Now, these duplicates are just visual duplicates. This is giving you an opportunity to quite literally visualize what your pattern is going to look like once you use it. Okay. So the only thing that's actually editable is what's within your blue tile itself. Okay. Now, speaking of these copies that you're seeing on the outside, that is something that you can adjust in your pattern options panel, which is what I want to talk about next. Okay. Once you actually create the pattern, you go to object, you go to pattern, you go to make, it will automatically, I'm sorry if you hear that banging door. It's the outside door of my apartment. It's very loud. But once you create the pattern, automatically, or rather by default, the pattern options panel will open. Okay. Regardless of if, like myself, you have it in your dock or you don't have it open or expanded in your works space at all. You don't have to. It will automatically pop up for you. Okay. Pattern options panel. At the very bottom, I suppose we're going to start here and then kind of zigzag through the information in this panel, so bear with me. We are going to start on the bottom. This is in regards to, again, the copies that you're seeing on the outside of your tile. Okay. You can choose how many copies you see on the outside of your tile. You could do 7x7 or, 1x3. I don't know why you do that. I mean, it depends on honestly how you're frankly planning on using your pattern. Sure. Fine. I just stick with the default. I think that that's fine. You'll also see that you have the capability of either, again, the default setting is dimming your copies by 50%. So that's why they're a bit transparent right now. I could change that to 100% so it looked exactly the same. Again, I'm just personally more comfortable with the 50%. There is no wrong way to do this. It's just, again, personal preferences. Okay. Show tile edge. I think that's very scary to not show the tile edge. I assess my pattern and how it's being repeated by the tile itself. So having that turned off sounds very scary. I mean, if you're that person, again, personal preference. Show swatch bounds. Again, that's something that I'm not concerned about, so I keep that turned off. Okay. Now, what I want to talk about next, my dog is being very needy, is on the top of your pattern options panel is a button. Okay. This button, very non-descriptive. It has two squares with an opposing arrow pointing left and right. What is that? Well, if you hover over any of these buttons or buttons in this application as a whole, it will tell you what it is, which is nice. It is your tile tool, your pattern tile, if you will, tool. Okay. Which means if you have it selected, I'm going to go ahead and click on it. If you have it selected, this is not selecting the artwork. This is selecting the tile for the pattern. And what I can do when I have that button selected is I can go in and I can adjust the size of this tile. Maybe I want to bring it down a bit. It'll bring the bits closer together. Maybe I want to bring this in a bit. Actually, really like that. Maybe this one a bit further. A little risky, but I'm here for it. Okay, yeah. And so you can play around with the size. I'm going to take it back. These two are a little too close for my liking. I can move that out a bit. There we go. Okay. So yeah, you can play around with the size of your tile, which is great. Okay. I tend to go back and forth to that quite frequently. So it's just good to know that that's there. And that's how you, again, can manipulate the size of the tile. You're not manipulating the size of the artwork. Okay. If you want to manipulate the size of the artwork, you can actually just use any of these tools that you were already using for the artwork itself. So your selection tool works the same. Your direct select works the same. Your shape tools, everything in your tools panel works exactly the same in your pattern editing mode, which is wonderful. Okay. In fact, we're actually going to be adding a shape to it later once we get the rest of this sorted here. Okay. Moving on. Underneath, you have the option to name your pattern. So I'm going to name it Leaf and Floral. Very unique. I know. Thank you. Leaf and floral tile type. So there's quite a few different options. You have grid, you have brick by row, brick by column. Again, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of visualizing your artwork, you do also have hex by column and hex by row. Okay, we're just going to circle through all of these so you can see the tile and how they're tiling differently. Brick by row, tiles them like that. Not really into it. Brick by column, that is actually really reflective of what we saw in the initial example. So I'm really liking that. I might make a few changes to it, but I do like that variety. I think it's a bit more interesting. You also have hex by column. Now, considering the size of the hex, you'll see that there is quite a bit of overlap happening, and that is par for the course if you're using a shape that you weren't, again, visualizing with your pattern already. And then lastly, hex by row. Again, a lot of overlap happening here. I wasn't intending on working with a hexagon shape for my tile, so that's to be expected. However, I do want to circle back to a brick by column. I do like brick by column. I think that that's quite nice. Okay. The only thing that I'm not the biggest fan of is where these two leaves are right next to each other. I wish that they were a little offset a bit more. So maybe if this was like pulled down a little bit more. So I'm going to just try a few different offsets to see. Like right there. Didn't even have to try that hard. Look at that. Much better. Okay. So I changed the brick offset from a half to 2/3. And it didn't change it a ton, but enough to where it looks a bit more intentional. Okay. It has a bit more of a balanced feeling just to do a before and after half. Again, they're right next to each other. It just looks a little awkward. And then 2/3. Now they're offset a bit more and it's a bit more comfortable. Okay. Love to see it. A couple of other things. You can also, if you prefer not to work with the tile tool on top, your alternative option is to work with the settings here. I find these to be, in my opinion, a bit more confusing to work with. Okay. But they are there. You can change the width and height of your tile. You could also choose to move tile with your artwork. So if you did scale your artwork up, it would scale the tile with it, or vice versa. You scale it down, the tile would scale down. Okay. You could also use this box here if you wanted to resize your tile to the art. I don't think I'm going to do that because I did make my tile a bit smaller than my artwork. If you were working with content that was overlapping, so if I circle back to hex by row real quick, there's a lot of stuff that's overlapping here. You do have control of how things are overlapping. You're not seeing any difference on this one. You should see difference here. There we go. So you can choose whether it's bottom in front or top in front, whatever you prefer. You can play around with those different overlapping options if you want your content to overlap. To be honest, I don't see a ton of people that work with patterns that deal with overlapping, but it is nice that it exists if the pattern that you're creating works better with, again, overlap. So these are some things to note when you're creating your pattern, or rather even beforehand, so that you know that you could potentially take advantage of them. Speaking of, a thing that you actually cannot take advantage of in Illustrator, unfortunately, especially if you have experience working with fashion applications that are not Illustrator, because frankly, Illustrator is not a fashion CAD program. And there has been fashion CAD programs. Okay, there is still fashion CAD programs. The thing is with that, I'm not trying to make an excuse for this application or anything. It's just the literal reality is one of the big missing components to the pattern editing in Illustrator is that there is no mirroring options. Okay, so if you have a pattern that's intended to be mirrored, okay, reflected on the other tiles, on the copies, that is unfortunately something that Illustrator is incapable of doing. Doesn't mean that you can't make it happen. It's just that you have to strategically work that out before you actually create the pattern itself. So there is definitely a strategy in making that happen. That's not a part of this seminar, but I just want you to know, again, that mirroring capability is unfortunately something that Illustrator is not capable of. And I just don't think it will be. Okay. That's my 2 cents. There is, however, actually, I shouldn't say that because Adobe has made a lot of changes to the apps. But at least there was an app at a point in time that you were able to create patterns quite quickly with. However, I don't know what changes that they have made to it, or if it even exists within the last 6 months. I haven't checked in on it. And yeah, they make a lot of changes with the apps, but it's, yeah, worth checking into. Anyway, I digress. Let's move back into Illustrator. Okay. So long story short, you do have a lot of capabilities in your pattern options. My suggestion is perhaps play around with them a bit. Make note of what you're able to do here and what you're not able to do, and design accordingly. Okay. So the big thing that I took advantage of thought-wise or thought process before creating this illustration was that I was visualizing working in a rectangular space. Okay. That was the big takeaway for me. Okay. So the last thing that I want to do is I want to add that color that you saw in the background of the rectangle and the sweater illustration. You saw that there was that sort of orange color in the background. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, you are able to completely manipulate the shapes within this pattern editing mode. Okay. Or add to the pattern itself. Okay. So I'm actually going to add this quote unquote background color by, and I say quote unquote because we're actually just going to be adding a rectangle. Okay. So we're going to be creating a rectangle and putting that in the background so that it has that color. So I'm going to go to my tools panel. I'm going to right click on my ellipse. I could have hit the letter M. I didn't, but I right click on the ellipse tool, rectangle tool. Again, letter M is the shortcut for it. And then I'm going to go up to my control panel. Actually, I'm going to deselect my stuff before I do anything. Shortcut for deselect, Control Shift A if you're on a PC, Command Shift A if you're on a Mac. Okay. Reason I needed to do that is because I wasn't manipulating the color of my soon to be shape. If I did change it, it was going to manipulate the color of the rose that I had selected, or tulip. Anyway, the flower. Back to the control panel I go. This time I am going to be manipulating the color of my actual soon to be rectangle. I'm going to just choose a simple orange here. Grab this orange. I'm happy about it. And I'm just going to click and drag. There we go. A rectangle. There we go. Love to see it. Completely orange. Okay. Now, that is because it's on top of everything. So if I were to look at the artwork in my layers panel, the rectangle is at the very top. Okay. You could move it in your layers panel. That's totally doable, but a bit faster of a method. I'm going to switch to my selection tool. I like to use my arrange shortcuts. Okay. So your arrange shortcuts are the bracket keys on your keyboard. So those are the two keys that are next to the letter P. Okay. Your left and right bracket. Okay. While you press those buttons, you're going to want to hold down Control and Shift or Command and Shift. Okay. That will bring your artwork, your shape all the way to the front or all the way to the back. All the way to the front, all the way to the back. And you can see that happening literally in my layers panel. Okay. Honestly, it's one of the shortcuts that I use all the time. That's why I'm making that suggestion. Again, your alternative method is you could click and drag that down in your layers panel. That works too. Again, none of these methods are wrong. It's just that there's multiple methods, and that's okay. Okay. So again, just to repeat, I did take that orange rectangle and I moved it below all of the artwork that I have. Okay. At this point in time, I am happy with my pattern. Okay. It looks the way that I want it to look. I am pleased as punch. I'm ready to move on. Okay. With that being said, on the top of my artboard, I suppose, it's right under the name of your file itself. Okay. You're going to see this little gray bar. And in this gray bar is basically, the bar is indicating the isolation that you're in. Okay. So when you're editing your pattern, it's considered an isolation. And that's what this gray bar is indicating. Also in this gray bar is the option to either, save a copy, done, or cancel everything, which I don't want to do. I put in a lot of work. So I could save a copy if I wanted that original artwork without any manipulation saved as well. But I don't. I don't care for that. I just want the one. So I'm just going to hit done right in the middle instead. I exit out of that pattern editing mode and it seems like nothing has happened. So at this point, it might be really disappointing. That is because your pattern has been saved as a swatch. So once you create the pattern, once you hit done, you essentially save that pattern. What you want to do next to find the pattern is to navigate to your swatches panel. Okay. You will see that pattern. It's right here. In fact, actually, let me just make the thumbnails a bit bigger. There it is. Still kind of hard to see. It really didn't help that much, did it? The leaf and floral. You can, when I hover over it, the name that I gave it earlier is there. So that's good. Leaf and floral, that is the pattern. It is a swatch. Okay. Before we move forward into actually applying this swatch, I do want to mention editing it. Okay. You can always edit your patterns after you create them. It's just not super obvious how to do it. Okay. If you want to edit your pattern once you've created it, so once you're looking at what I'm looking at right now, what you need to do is you need to hover over that swatch and double click with your mouse. Okay. So I'm just going to hit done real quick to exit out of it again and just repeat that one more time. So again, in my swatches panel, I'm going to open up my swatches panel. If I want to edit an existing pattern that I've already created or that I grabbed somewhere else, whatever, hover over it, double click. It will go into your pattern editing mode and you can adjust whatever you need. Okay. So moving on from there. All right. Now that we know how we can edit the pattern, we have the pattern set up nicely for what we want to use it for. I want to start using it. Okay. We're going to be using it in two different methods, just filling in a regular shape. This is probably something that you've already done. And then we're going to use the live paint bucket tool to fill in the sweater, and then also resizing it. Okay. So step one, rectangle. I'm going to grab this rectangle. Okay. And simply change the fill color. So I'm going to navigate to wherever I want for my swatches, just literally 3 different places, but I'm going to open up my swatches panel and select the leaf and floral. There it is. Love to see it. Okay. So leaf and floral, there it is, applied within the rectangle. Ultimately, it could additionally function as a stroke as well if you wanted it to, but more often than not, I'm assuming you would be using it as a fill color, and it works just like any other fill color would. Okay, it fills in the area. Okay. Now, I could do the same thing here, I guess, but it's not as efficient. So let's say, for example, perhaps I wanted like the collar here or maybe the cuffs here to maybe be a solid orange instead of the pattern. If I just went in and I filled it with the pattern, I wouldn't be able to do that. Okay. So instead, and what I use more than just adding a fill color is I take advantage of the live paint tool, the live paint bucket. Okay. The live paint bucket allows you to apply color to a variety of different locations, but also be able to add different colors as long as your lines are overlapping. Okay. So if you have the intention of applying a different color to your artwork, you do want to think about making sure that all of these lines are touching. So let me like zoom up. Oh, I didn't have it selected. Duh. Okay. So if I zoom down, oh my goodness. If I zoom down here, okay. So a good example of something that I could fill and I could not fill. The sleeve on the bottom here, I will absolutely be able to fill this area with a different color. That is fine and dandy. However, if for whatever reason I wanted to fill in this little space between the dotted stroke and the rest of the sweater, no dice, because you'll see that the line connects here, but there's an itty bitty little space here. In fact, I actually think that there is a space in the collar if I take a look. No, the collar looks fine, so I think we should be good. Okay, there's a lot of overlapping stuff happening, but we're not going to worry about it. So anyway, just some food for thought there before you get yourself started with the live paint tool. Okay, live paint bucket. I'll eventually get the name of it right. So also something that you don't have to do is just a preference of mine. I prefer to group my content before using the live paint bucket tool. Frankly, it's going to group it for you regardless of if you have it grouped or not. So there's that. But a prerequisite that you absolutely have to do is that you do have to have your content selected. Okay. So before switching over to the Live Paint bucket, you have to have your content selected. Okay. Again, friendly reminder, once you start using the Live Paint bucket tool, it will take all of this and put it into a Live Paint group. Okay. So some food for thought there. So be mindful if you want something grouped together or you don't before you go in and use the tool. This tool is sort of tricky to find. It's under the shape builder tool. So it's just kind of a sort of a strange place. It's also underneath another tool. If you are looking for it in your tools panel, your shape builder is, I don't know, 3/4 of the way down your tools panel. Looks like 2 circles, arrow, right click. That's where it is. Okay. My suggestion is to try to memorize the single letter keyboard shortcut so you don't have to sit there and search for it. Weird fun fact, the way that I remembered the shortcut for the Live Paint bucket tool was that I thought about kangaroos because the word kangaroo starts with a K, and that worked for me. So maybe that will work for you as well. Not sure, but no relation to Live Paint bucket, but memorable to say the least. So there's that. Sorry about the gulp. I went ahead and I pressed the letter K on my keyboard, switched to the Live Paint bucket tool. I also somehow unselected my stuff. So I'm going to go back to my selection tool, select that again. Whoops. Now switch over to my Live Paint bucket tool. And once you have that sorted correctly, again, you have it selected, you hover over your content and you will see that it will highlight in red if it's ready to make that Live Paint group, as I mentioned before. Before you actually click though, you want to open your swatches at this point. Okay. Swatches, and you want to choose the swatch. So I'm going to choose the pattern. Okay. So real quick, those steps again. Step 1, selection tool, select your artwork. Has to be selected before you grab the tool. As you saw, if it's not selected, nothing's going to happen. Step 2, hit the letter K as in kangaroo for the Live Paint bucket. Step 3, select your swatch of choice. So in this case, it's going to be our leaf and floral pattern. Step 4, apply. Now, applying the color is so easy. I love it so much. Okay. It is a literal single click. So I'm going to single click, boop, applies the pattern like magic. It's amazing. Okay. Do you want to see something even more incredible? If you want to fill in all of the places of this sweater, you can triple click with your mouse and it will apply it to all the extra spaces that are currently transparent. So how it works is if you triple click, it's going to apply this new color swatch to any place that has the same color. So I'm hovering over a place that has no color right now. So it's going to apply it to any other place that has no color. Okay. You'll notice that the one place that it won't apply it to is actually this gray bit here. Okay. So I'm going to triple click 1, 2, 3. See, as promised, applied it everywhere except the inside of the collar. I still want that to have the pattern. So boop, I'm going to add it there. Okay. And just to add a little bit of spice to the design, I am going to just add a little bit of fun. I'm going to switch to a solid orange color and just apply the orange to the collar bits and to the sleeves because why not? I can do whatever I want in Illustrator. Look at that. Beautiful. Okay. So simple, so efficient. This is, again, one of my all-time favorite Illustrator tools. It was truly life-changing once I realized this tool existed, and 20 out of 10 recommend that you use it for your designs as well. Okay. Again, the big thing to think about with your artwork that you're using this for is that really make sure that your lines are overlapping or at least touching. If there's a gap, you won't be able to fill in that space. Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and move on to the next step. I'm going to switch back to my selection tool. Okay. I hit the letter V to do that, by the way. Selection tool. Here's the thing. The pattern on the sweater, not that I hate it, because I don't. I think larger patterns or oversized patterns are really fantastic, especially now. But a lot of your garments are going to tend to have a pattern like this, much smaller. Okay. So if you create a pattern, the initial design is much bigger than what you want to apply it to. Basically, you need to scale up or scale down your pattern. You're able to do that. Okay. Again, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. You can do it a bit more manually than what I'm about to show you. So just keep in mind that this is just one method. Okay. But what I'm going to do is ultimately transform the pattern size. So I only want to transform the pattern size within this selection. So this live paint group. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on the live paint group. Again, I have it selected. Under my right click, I'm going to navigate to transform. And under transform, I'm going to navigate to scale. Okay. Now, before I do anything, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my options. I do not want to scale my artwork. The only thing that I'm trying to scale right now is the pattern within the artwork. Okay. So in your options, you will see that you can have either turned on or off transform objects. I'm going to turn that off. Now, this is a setting that I had because I did this earlier. So I already have transform patterns turned on, but you probably don't. So if you are following along, make sure that there's a check mark next to transform patterns. Okay. Scale corners, strokes and effects. I don't have any of those applied, so I don't care. Okay. If I did, I would care more. I don't. Okay. So those are fine. I don't care. But transform objects, no thank you. Have that turned off. Transform patterns, yes please. Have a check mark next to it. Okay. Next step is actually to make sure that preview is turned on. Live preview is very helpful. Okay. By default, it might not necessarily be turned on. So that's a helpful thing to just be mindful of, having that live preview turned on before you go in and start making some adjustments here. Okay. So I'm going to do some uniform scaling adjustments. Again, as I mentioned, I'm going to go a bit smaller than what I have right now. So I'm going to start with 50 and I'm going to hit tab. Okay. I press tab because if I hit enter or return on my keyboard, it's going to exit out of this dialog box. I don't want that to happen. I'm kind of just messing with the size right now. So if that size is perhaps a bit too small, I could go up a bit. I'll try 70. Yeah, I like that. That's nice. Okay. You can play around with a bunch of different sizes. You could also do non-uniform if that's what you're into as well. Okay. Basically, to summarize this feature, I just want to let you all know, because this is about as far as we're going to dive into this, but ultimately you are able to manipulate your pattern just like you would be able to manipulate objects. So you can scale, you can rotate, etc., your patterns within your object without affecting the object itself, as long as you adjust, again, those options. Okay. So the same would reign true if you, again, wanted to rotate it or anything like that. All right. So I'm happy with that result. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. All right. So now we have our beautiful flat colored in with our pattern of choice that we've created. We have created our pattern. We have used our live paint bucket and filling options to fill in our content. And now the main thing left in terms of the design aspect is to add the ridges for the cuffs and the bottom portion of the sweater. Sorry, did I say ridges? I did, I think. And then I said cuffs. Okay, I hope I said that correctly. If I didn't, I apologize. The way that I chose to do that was through creating a custom brush. Okay. Custom brushes are a massive asset when it comes to fashion design, because there's a lot of components to fashion design that requires repetitive content. Lace, like elastic bands, zippers, stitches. I mean, the list goes on, truly. And there is a lot of resources for this type of stuff that already does exist, but sometimes some of the simpler things don't necessarily exist. So this is how you can resolve that. Now, you might have noticed that on the this garment already, there's a dashed line indicating a stitch line, which is great. And that's actually quite easy to do with just adding a dash to a stroke. But I can't make that any taller. So what I want to do with this to add the ridges is I want like a really tall a dashed line, basically. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 line segments. I don't have to create 2. I could create 1, but feeling like 2. You could do 4, you could do 6. It doesn't matter how many segments. I prefer to work with a few more. To be frank, I was struggling with 1 in terms of the spacing, which you'll see here in a little bit. And that's why I prefer to go 2. But, live your best life. Before we start doing this, I do also want to tell you that we're about to create what's called a pattern brush. Okay. A pattern brush is a brush that repeats content over and over. Okay. There's also an art brush. There's also a calligraphy brush. There's also like 2 other brushes. Yeah. So we are focused on a pattern brush, which ultimately means it's going to repeat content on a stroke, on a line. Okay. When you're creating a pattern brush, number 2, visualize the content or the assets in a square, okay, or rectangle, okay, rectangle, square. If you have any like jagged lines and stuff like that, it's not going to connect well, or probably not the way that you expect it to. So always visualize kind of like the pattern, like a square, okay. So for this, I could use a pen tool, but I don't know. I prefer the line segment tool for line segments, I guess. Either or, again, is totally fine. Before I actually create these lines, I'm again going to go either to my swatches panel, I'm going to my control panel, and I'm going to just switch the fill to none. Dog is saying hello again to everybody. Switch my stroke to black. And 1 point is about the thickness of the outline of the sweater, so I don't want it to be that intense. I want it to be a little bit more soft. So I'm going to change it from 1 point to 0.5 points. Okay. I am also going to zoom up quite a bit and just initially create this artwork just in this little area here. Okay. Oh, I missed a spot. You see that? Oopsies. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and create a straight line. So if you're trying to create a straight line with the line segment tool, the line segment tool is a click and drag instead of a click and click like a pen tool. If you want a straight line, you're having a hard time, hold down Shift. Shift is your perfection key. Keeps things in line. I want to go a bit taller than what my cuffs are. And to be honest, I don't know how much taller I need it to be. I'm going to hope that. I'm going to release my mouse click. Let me see. Yeah, that should be fine. It's a bit taller. That way I can manipulate the stroke weight and make it bigger or smaller. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that's good. I'm not going to try to recreate that with this tool. I'm just going to make a copy of it. So again, I'm going to switch back to my selection tool, tried and true. Hold down Alt or Option, hover over the selected path, click and drag. I'm going to also hold down Shift so it is, let's do like this far away. Being indecisive. Right there. Right there. Perfect. And release my mouse click. Cool. Love to see it. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and select those 2 shapes. Okay, that's all I need. Honestly, I didn't even need the 2. Like I could do the 1, but again, I was having troubles with it earlier when I tested it out in terms of spacing. So doing 2 solved that. And there's probably a logical answer to it, like there usually is, but I don't have one for you right now. My apologies. Anyway, I digress. I have those 2 selected, and now to create the custom brush. In my dock, I am going to go to my brushes panel, and I am going to go to the bottom right of the panel. There's going to be a little plus sign, kind of like if you were about to add a new layer. Okay, so a little plus sign. I'm going to click on the plus sign. And as promised, there's a whole bunch of different brushes that you can choose from in Illustrator. We are working with, or rather trying to create a pattern brush. Pattern brush. Okay. If you want it repeated, it's pattern. Patterns are repeated. I guess that's how I remember it. That's my best professional tip. I'm going to hit OK. You get this fancy dancy preview, all this fun stuff that we're going to be talking about in a hot second. Let's just change the name to ridges, I guess, even though it doesn't, I mean, it's ridges, fine. Scale. You can change the scale to right now fixed or pressure. If I was working with a Wacom tablet or something that was a bit more like fluid, perhaps I would do pressure. Really, the only time I would think about doing pressure is anything but fashion design. If you're doing any sort of illustrative work, yeah, pressure is awesome. Here we're trying to go for consistency, so pressure is not awesome. Spacing, okay. The spacing right now, it's actually overlapping. So there is no spacing right now on my brush, meaning that my lines might look extra thick and I might not want that. So I can play with the spacing. I can change it, for example, to 50%. Okay. And I'm seeing inconsistent. Let me try 100. Why are you so inconsistent? 80. It's close. 70. 90. Yes. We'll get there eventually. You can play around with it. I mean, you could have stuck with 0 spacing because, I mean, that's kind of one of the reasons why I did 2. But again, it might make the line thickness a bit thicker than what you want. So I want to be mindful of that. Okay, moving on. This is ultimately determining what each of the side of the brush, if you're, going around a corner or an inside corner, the beginning and end. I usually never add a beginning and end. Yeah. However, I tend to add outer corners and inside corners, but for whatever reason oh, look at that. It actually did its job. Last time I tried to create the brush, the auto center and this auto center and auto between were not there. And I was like, excuse me, why are you not there? Because those are the two that I usually use. As you can see, it looks the most realistic. Yeah, that's for when you go around corners and things like that, if you want it to have a corner. Otherwise, if you don't choose one, if you just go, hold on, if you just go none, it will literally just be cut off if you go over or if you make a turn in your path. I don't think that's a good look. So just in case of emergency, basically, I like to add usually the auto center. And then the opposite, auto between, or sorry, they're actually both auto between, my mistake. Auto between for the inside corner, cool. Love to see it. I don't do the flip along or across for my brushes personally. In terms of fit, I choose stretch to fit. Okay. I think that that's going to be the most advantageous choice for making the brush result look how you intended it to be without it being skewed. Okay. Colorization. Now, this is a bit confusing. And to make the long story short, I won't be able to change the color of this brush. The only reason is because the stroke that I chose is black. If it was any other color other than black, I could do tints of whatever color I chose. I could do tints and shades of whatever color I chose, or I could do a hue shift. Okay. Any of the above aren't going to be super accurate in color representation, just to give you a heads up. Which can be a bit frustrating. But if you did, let's say, a red line, chose hue shift, you would be able to change the color of that brush to green or blue or what have you. I realize. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the heads up. That's been a while. I appreciate y'all just making sure that I am on it. Sorry about that. All right. So we are in the pattern brush options. My apologies. Can y'all remind me of when the last time you saw my screen was? Did you see me create these two shapes here by chance? Before we move on. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't, because I'm going to probably circle back and repeat it. Okay, we're still going a little slow. Just let me know, okay? So any hoot, hue shift, can't do that with black. So that is what it is. I'll be looking at the chat just to see when we might be circling back. So I'm going to hit OK to commit to that, and that's actually going to create the brush, okay? I am going to repeat that just a little faster, just to ensure that we covered our bases with that, because I wasn't paying attention to my OBS and didn't switch screens. My apologies. So just to circle back a couple of steps, I'm going to just get rid of that brush. Step one, I created 2 of these lines. Let me just zoom up into them. Just 2 simple lines using the line segment tool. You could use the pen tool, whatever floats your boat. I did a stroke of 0.5 so it wouldn't be so thick. I created 2 just so it would be a little bit easier for me to do the brush. And then to create my pattern brush, I'm going to have the item selected. I'm going to navigate to my brushes panel. I am going to navigate down to the bottom right-hand side to click on the plus to add the new brush. You have your new brush options. A lot of them, just remember that you're repeating something. A repetition is a pattern. So I'm going to choose pattern brush. And now we are in our pattern brush options. I'm going to change the name to ridges. And scale is fixed. You can also choose pressure if you want to. Spacing, I'm going to adjust to 80. I'm going to change the outside corner to auto between, as well as the inside corner to auto between as well. Okay. I do not add space or approximate path because it's going to essentially skew the initial concept of the brush. Not literally skew it. Well, yeah, add space would just give you too much space. That's why I don't choose it. Then lastly, what we were talking about was the colorization. So you have different methods, but you won't be able to use any of these ultimately if you start with black. So if you did want to, or it had intention of changing the color of a brush, start with a color. So if you started with red, you could do tints of red, or you could do tints and shades of red, or you could do a complete hue shift, which is usually what you would do anyway for colorization of brushes. And in that case, let's say the brush was initially red, you could change it to blue, you could change it to green, whatever. Okay. The colors, by the way, won't be 100% accurate because it's considered a hue shift. It's not like it's weird, but yeah, you can. So none. We're just doing black, so none. That's that. Key color exists only if you are working with multiple colors in your brush, but more complex stuff. So at this point in time, I'm happy with what I have going on. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And you will see that I now have a brush living inside of my brushes panel. That is that new custom brush that I created. Okay. So next to is apply it. Next is to apply it. I skipped some words there. So I'm going to navigate down to one of my cuffs here. I am yet again going to use tried and true line segment tool. Don't judge me. I just prefer it. And I'm going to click and drag and create a line segment from the beginning of the path to the end of the path here. Try my best to align it. I'm just kind of eyeballing it, to be honest. I'm just going to switch to my selection tool for now so I don't accidentally create more line segments. And then I'm just going to go to my brushes panel, click once, and it applied. Love to see it. However, see that looks like the black is, never mind. Black looks a little off to me, but it'll be fine. The actual lines themselves, or the ridges, are a bit tall. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to adjust the height of those lines so that they're a bit shorter and they fit into the space better. So to do that, I'm going to go to stroke and I can change the weight. So 0.75, I think that's still going to be too tall. Let me see. Yeah, it's still too tall. Too small. So it's somewhere in between. Okay, so we had 7.5. Let's try 6. Still too small, so 6.5. Yep, that'll work. So 6.5 it is, making notes for the future. So basically, I start with something that's not necessarily the height that I want. I frankly don't care as long as it's not way too big or way too small, because I am able to adjust the size with the stroke weight anyway. So that's my hot take on that. So I'm going to just zoom out one step and then move over to this bit. Again, line segment tool. Wrong shortcut. Oops. And then create my line. There it is. Love to see it. Brushes panel. Apply the brush. Too big, but we know, or it should be rather, 0.65. Make sure there's a space there. No, too big, too small. Oops. There we go, 7.5 for that. Cool. Now, what I want to do with this guy over here on this cuff, I don't want to try to recreate that. That sounds like too much work. Instead, I'm going to make a copy and reflect it. Okay, so I'm actually going to circle back to this cuff real quick. Click once to select it. Right click. And I'm going to choose transform. Again, there's more than one way to do this. I'm just a right clicker, so bear with me. Transform, reflect. Okay. Everything's fine. Reflecting vertical. That's exactly what I want. The trick here is instead of hitting OK, if you hit OK, it's just going to reflect the shape that you have selected. Instead, what you want to do is you want to choose copy. Okay. So I'm going to choose copy. And now it made a duplicate. Reflected at the opposite side. I'm going to click on that, hold down shift, drag. Side note, fun fact, make sure if you're trying to move something perfectly vertical, perfectly horizontal, by using shift, you have to click first in Illustrator with your mouse, then hold down shift. Otherwise, if you hold down shift first and click, it's just going to deselect it. What a fun sponge. But it's the life we live, okay? Moving on. I'm going to zoom out. I don't have to recreate these. I just need to duplicate them. Okay, so I'm going to, with my selection tool, select one, hold down shift to select the other two, then switch my modifying key to Alt Option, wait for the double arrows to show up like we used earlier today, click and drag those beasties over. Look at that. Love the smart guides telling me what to do. Release my mouse click first, then release my modifying keys. Okay. Always mouse first, modifying keys last. Look at that. Beautiful. We have ourselves nice little ridged cuffs. Nice little ridged bottom of the sweater. Love to see it. It's beautiful. Okay. Neat. Last step. Saving your file. Okay. There's a couple of things to consider when saving this. All right. Number one, what are you saving it for? And also, who are you saving it for? Okay. If you are using an online resource like Printify or Spoonflower, like the ones that I mentioned earlier, go to their website and check what their recommendations are for files. Are you just sending them the pattern? Are you sending them mockups? For online resources, full disclosure, you're 9 chances out of 10 just sending them the pattern. So you would just send them this here. Okay. If that's the case, what I recommend to do is the following. Okay. Step 1, since you have this beautiful artboard already, I recommend just creating another artboard. Why not? Okay. Tools panel on the right-hand side. It's actually near the bottom. So you have zoom, hand, slice still exists. And then you have your artboard tool. Okay. It kind of looks like a crop tool. Click on that. And then on the top of your control panel, it changes to all artboard stuff. And you could just click the little plus sign, add a new artboard. Love to see it. That's it. Okay. Next, what you can do is then switch over to your rectangle tool, fill this space with the rectangle with your fill. Now, the only concern that I have here is you're not going to likely want to show them the entire pattern. Instead, you will likely just want to show them a part of it. Okay, specifically the area that's in the tile. If you send them this, then it's going to have the weird how do I explain this? It's not going to connect well. Okay, so where these shapes sort of end at the end and they're not going to connect, yeah, that's what your pattern would end up potentially looking like. Again, always double check what their, preference is for these files before sending it. Okay, with that being said, what I would suggest doing, oh my God, we should talk about that. I can't just say, oh my God, and just pretend that nothing happened. I did scale this down and I like freaked out because it scaled the pattern, right? And I immediately took a step back. This is kind of, it's nice sometimes, but it can also be annoying. Depends on what you're trying to do. In this case, it's kind of annoying. Okay. I don't want the pattern to move. Okay. So I need to change a setting. Okay, this is a setting that in your literal preferences, which is, it's not super silly because there's also like a stroke and corner preference is kind of similar, but it is important to know. It's a random side note fun fact, but you're probably going to experience this at some point anyway, so it's important. Yeah, so with scaling these patterns, if you don't want it to happen, again, I need to go to my preferences. My preferences, because I'm on a PC, is under my edit menu at the very bottom. If you are on a PC, if you're on a Mac, it's going to be under your Illustrator option and then 2 options down from that. So you're going to go to Preferences General, so just the general preferences, and you will see that under General, there is an option on the right-hand side, 3rd option down, Transform Pattern Tiles. Oh my God. To be honest, this is something that when I'm working on something, I frequently turn on and off depending on what I'm doing, which I know sounds annoying and frustrating, but it's honestly the truth. So I'm going to uncheck that and then hit OK. That only adjusts the preference for this file, no other files. Also, to give you a heads up. Does it mark the center? Yeah, you answered your own question, Elaine. It does. It indicates the center of the shape that I have selected. Nailed it. Awesome job. Okay, now that it's not going to scale as I resize this, sorry, my headphones are falling off. There we go. I can go in and resize and the pattern stays the same. So what I'm going to do, oh, my overlap is going to be a problem. I'm going to scale this down. But yeah, my overlap is going to be a bit of an issue. Specifically up here, okay? I can always fix that, okay? So again, depending on what you're doing in terms of sending it to somebody, you might want to fix that, okay? So I can go back to my swatches panel, double click on my pattern. I know that this is kind of excessive, but bear with me. I can adjust my pattern tile. I can just lift her up a little bit. A little bit more. A little bit more. There we go. Now she's nice. That will work. Oh, this one's a little offset too. So we have a little bit more space, but hey, it still works. Okay. And once I make those changes, I can just hit done and it will instantly apply. So it has already been applied. I got to make this, where are we? Here we are. Okay, resize this to the pattern itself. Love to see it. Okay, was that extra? Yep. Why was it extra? Is because I had the overlapping happening. So there's that can of worms. Some things and food for thought to think about while you're making these patterns. Also, I know this is kind of small, but I don't really care because it's vector based. So what I'm going to also do is I'm going to just resize this artboard to being quite small, unless, let me actually look. I wonder if Spoonflower, I don't want to take too much. Oh, I have like 10 minutes left. So just kidding. I'm not going to look. But honestly, in most of these cases, what I would do is I would just go back to my artboard tool and I can just resize my artboard. It even snaps to the artwork. There we go. Okay. Long story short, have an artboard that's just your pattern. Okay. For most online places like Spoonflower, Printify, etc., things that are doing like the full-on patterns. Okay. Once you have it in your artboard, what you can do is go File, Save As. Then you want to change your Save As type to PDF. Use artboards is already turned on, but you can choose Arrange. Just switch it to 2. And then I'm just going to label this Pattern Swatch. Now, what you might not know is that PDFs are, in fact, vector-based files. Okay, so I'm going to save it as a PDF. A dialog box is going to come up. One of the notable things that I want to mention here is that once I save it as a PDF, preserve Illustrator editing capabilities. It is literally fully editable, vector-based file. It is, however, a PDF. Love to see it. Makes sharing these files extremely efficient. It's amazing. Arguably one of my favorite things about PDFs. That is as long as you choose the Illustrator default. So if you choose any of the other ones, preserve Illustrator editing capabilities might be turned off. It might also do some weird things with the compression. So my suggestion to make sure that it is in fact a vector-based PDF, you're not switching anything over, just choose the Illustrator default, you're fine and dandy. Okay. If for whatever reason you needed marks and bleeds, those do exist here and you could add them as well. Okay. Hit Save PDF. And that's saved. You don't see it automatically open because it's just one of the 2 artboards, but I'm just going to open it so you all can see it. Let me see. There it is. I feel bamboozled. It's supposed to just be my one artboard. Why is it both? Interesting. Okay. I'm going to have to look back at that. I mean, in theory, in the second file, I could just delete the first artboard, but that's weird. So I guess that's something to note. Let me look at one other thing. What a plot twist. Love plot twist. Just kidding. Hold on. What I'm about to do is I'm going to open it with Acrobat. Look at this, y'all. Okay. So it is just, look at how big that is. Oh no, I had an extra overlapping thing. Oopsies. Could fix that. So it is just a 1 page in the actual PDF. Okay. So what I would suggest in that second PDF, it's because of the Illustrator editing capabilities. I know why. It retained all of the assets and all of the contents in the initial Illustrator file. Fine. That makes sense. But full disclosure, if that's not what you want, I would just take that PDF and remove the second artboard. So realistically, that's exactly what I would do. I would open up the PDF. Okay. Because I would absolutely not want any confusion. So I'd just get rid of all this. Go back to my artboard. I know I'm doing this fast. This is not fair to you. But I could select this artboard. Right next to the Create New Artboard button in your control panel is a Delete Artboard button. Okay. And I could just remove it. Fine. While I'm here, since there was that little bit, I'm just going to scale this back a little bit. There we go. Done and done. And I can save. Okay. If I was actually sending it to a manufacturer, meaning somebody is going to be creating this garment from scratch. So this is for those of you that are sending again to a manufacturer. This is also the process that you would take if you were creating an enamel pin or a patch or any of those types of things where you're sending a file to a company, again, it's not, although some online resources you can do this, but again, directly to the manufacturer. If you're sending it directly to the manufacturer, you would instead send them something similar to this, where you would actually show them a literal mock-up of the actual fashion flat that you are creating and how you want it to be designed. Okay, this is what they use as their reference for when they actually create the pattern, which means something different in the manufacturing world. But ultimately you would send them something somewhat similar to this, not exactly. Okay, but you would give them a flat design. All right, you wouldn't just give them the pattern unless they are, again, working on a garment that has already been created. All right. Lastly, if you wanted to share this design, let's say the front and back of the sweater, that's the most realistic thing that you would want to share through a variety of social platforms or your website, etc. You will want to save an image format of this content. And it's likely that you're not going to want all this extra jazz. You're probably not going to want your original illustration. You don't need the rectangle of color, what have you. You just want to maybe make a social post or an e-commerce page or what have you of the front and the back of your design. Okay. In that instance, exporting the entire artboard is not an option. Or exporting the artboards is not an option. You just want this piece of the design. That's where asset export comes into play. Okay. Love this feature and I use it all the time. Okay. So bonus points if you're also trying to export maybe a logo or maybe a body of text. Well, hopefully not a body of text. Well, maybe, but an illustration that's a part of a bigger illustration. The list goes on. Asset export is what you can use for it. Okay. Prerequisite to using asset export. Whatever you want to be exported as one singular thing has to be grouped. Okay. So if the front and the back were not grouped, they were separate, they would then in asset export be separate objects, but they are one live paint group. So therefore, when I go to my asset export panel in my doc, I'm going to open that up. I have a selection of my live paint group, click and drag it over, release my mouse click and boop, there it is, front and back. Beautiful. Okay. I can also change the name to sweater. Just sweater. I'm trying to be fancy. Sweater. Okay. You could also, in theory, do this with the actual pattern itself, because you can export as the format of PDF. So there's that idea as well. You know, pick your poison, I suppose. But in this case, again, I just want to share this on the socials or also on the e-commerce website. So I want to export it as an image file format. You have a few. You have PNG and JPEG specifically that are pixel based. SVG is vector. And so I want to choose what's going to compress the information the best. And that one for illustrations with vector-based stuff, that's going to be PNG. Make sure if you are choosing PNG that you are not choosing PNG 8. That's going to be smaller. It's going to be reduced colors. I mean, in this illustration, I could honestly use PNG 8 because I don't have more than 256 colors, but just use regular PNG. Scale, wow, I have it set to 2. I don't need 2. I'll just do 1. Okay. With each of these options for the format, you do have additional options for it as well. So you might want to take a look at that before actually exporting. So there is this little, look, I don't know. It looks like a little dialog box. Okay. In here, hold on. It's here, but I don't think I think there's an easier way. No, there isn't. Why is that so extra? Okay. So yeah, you do have to go to that button. It pulls up this dialog box. I'm sorry that this is extra. I didn't make it. So you have export 4 screens. and a few additional options. Specifically, what I'm looking for is this little gear, which again, I know is extra, but there's a big thing that you can toggle on and off for PNGs, and that's transparency. Okay. So if you want to make sure that your transparency is either on or off, you want to go to this gear and make sure that it's adjusted accordingly here. So I'm going to go to the gear. PNG, awesome. Love to see it. I have background color set to white. So I would have been fine and dandy if I didn't go here. But again, if you're somebody that's transferring between transparent and white frequently, like myself, you're going to want to go here. I know it's a little bit of an extra fun fact, but important. So again, background color white, because I'm sharing it on socials primarily. I don't need it to be transparent. I'm going to hit save settings. Okay. Once you're happy with your settings for your format, make sure that you have the asset that you want to export selected. Either here, I can hit cancel out of here too and do the same in the export panel, or here. If that is not highlighted in blue, here or in the dialog box, it won't export. So you have to make sure that it's selected here, highlighted in blue. Then bottom right corner again of this or the dialog box, export. You get to choose where to save it. I'm going to save it to the seminar folder, select folder, and it's done. Okay, let me open it real quick for you all. And meanwhile, let me open up the floor for any questions. So if you have questions, now is the time to ask them. Oh, here it is. Here's the image. Don't worry about that line. It's just a screen. Or maybe it isn't. Okay, maybe worry about that line. I might want to re-export it. Oops. Interesting. Any questions? I'm gonna just switch to the large screen. This time I don't have anything to show you. I'm so sorry that I was zoomed in on my face while y'all couldn't see what I was doing for a minute, but thank you for letting me know in the chat. While I wait to see if you do have any questions, I just want to thank you all for being here. I very much appreciate it. I don't know if you noticed, but I absolutely love Illustrator. I love using Illustrator for fashion. So I'm super pumped to have the opportunity to share this with you all. I really hope that you all take this opportunity to take a look at the classes that Noble Desktop offers. We actually do have an Illustrator for Fashion class coming up, which is a full 2 days chock full of amazingly useful information, including some reflective content of what we talked about in the seminar, but a lot more. We would actually be talking about how to use the pen tool to create these fashion flats from scratch, among many other different features. So if that's something that interests you and you are in the New York area or are able to come to the New York area, definitely check that out. That's happening in a couple of weeks. I should actually look at the date to tell you all. So hold on, I'll tell you here in a hot second. Oh my goodness. Longer than a hot second. Longer than a hot second. Okay. It is happening on March 16th and March 18th. So it'll be on a Wednesday and a Friday. So that's essentially in 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks from today, ultimately, is our class, 2 days long, Illustrator for Fashion. Again, if you liked the content that I went through during this stream tonight, I strongly recommend taking a look at it because we deep dive into this stuff. And it's, again, in my opinion, so much fun. And I hope you all enjoyed your time here. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.